The snow was falling softly that morning in Silverbrook when Officer Daniel Hayes heard the knock that would change everything. Behind that door was a story of betrayal, courage, and a father's unbreakable love. A story that began with a whisper and ended in the storm. Have you ever wondered how far a parent would go to protect their child? Stay with me till the end, because this tale will remind you that even in the coldest night, light always finds its way home. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know how far this story travels. Wishing you a peaceful, blessed day ahead. The snow had returned to Silverbrook like an uninvited guest that no one had the heart to turn away. It blanketed the rooftops, softened the roads, and dulled every sound into a ghostly hush. The morning sky was pale blue, fragile and still, and the air carried that crisp scent of winter that hinted at both peace and loneliness. Officer Daniel Hayes, 38, stepped out of his modest wooden house at the edge of town. He was tall, with the kind of quiet posture that spoke more of discipline than pride. His hair, once dark, now bore strands of early gray, and his face carried lines that no laughter had touched for years. Beneath the layers of his navy blue uniform, he was a man built from duty and loss. His eyes, storm gray and weary, held the weight of someone who had seen too many goodbyes. Daniel had served Silverbrook for 15 years, known for his calm restraint and unwavering sense of justice. But since the explosion 3 winters ago that had taken his wife, Margaret, every step he took felt like walking through glass. His colleagues said, "Grief makes you silent." Daniel's silence had turned into a second skin. Inside the house, the warmth was faint but steady. On the living room couch, his 8-year-old daughter, Lila Hayes, sat curled up beneath a blanket, a thin wisp of a child with auburn hair that always seemed to fall into her eyes. Her small fingers held tightly to a worn-out rag doll with one button eye missing, the last gift from her mother. Lila rarely spoke. When she did, her voice came out soft, careful, as if words themselves might shatter. She was shy, polite, and observant. Too observant for a child. Her teacher said she drew beautifully, but most of her sketches were of cloudy skies and empty fields. By the fireplace lay Ranger, Daniel's retired German shepherd. At 5 years old, Ranger had the lean, powerful build of a police K9, black and tan fur, amber eyes alert yet gentle. He had once served beside Daniel in search and rescue missions, known in the department for his uncanny ability to track scent miles through blizzards. After Margaret's death, Daniel couldn't bear to let Ranger go back into service. The dog had saved lives with him. Now, he was saving what remained of his family. Every morning, Ranger followed Lila from room to room, never letting her out of sight. When she slept, he lay at her door like a silent guardian. That morning, the house smelled faintly of coffee and pine wood smoke. Daniel poured himself a cup and glanced at the clock. 6 a.m. Sharp, as always. Routine was his religion. Routine was safe. He placed a small folded note on the kitchen counter. "Dad will be home late. Have dinner with Mrs. Barlow." He had written that same sentence almost every day for 3 years. But today, his hand hesitated halfway through the word home. Something about the stillness of the morning unsettled him. Mrs. Barlow, the elderly housekeeper, who lived 2 doors down, soon arrived to watch Lila. She was a stout woman with silver curls pinned tightly at the back of her head, and a smile that carried equal parts patience and gossip. "You look tired, Danny," she said, setting her gloves on the counter. "That precinct's going to bury you one day." Daniel gave her the faintest smile, the kind that looked more like a reflex than emotion. "I've been worse," he murmured. "You say that every week," she replied, then glanced at Lila. "And the little one?" Lila looked up briefly but said nothing. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor, as if answering for her. When Daniel left for work, the streets of Silverbrook glistened under the morning sun. The town was small, clusters of old wooden houses, a single coffee shop, a gas station, and the white-steepled church that served as both sanctuary and gossip center. The station stood near the frozen river, its flag stiff in the wind. Inside, the scent of strong coffee mixed with the cold, metallic tang of gun oil. Officer Noah Bennett, Daniel's longtime partner, waved from his desk. Noah was 35, short and broad-shouldered, with a rough beard and eyes that could either laugh or threaten depending on the situation. He was loyal, impulsive, and often said Daniel was the soul of the department. "You didn't show up at the memorial last night," Noah said quietly. Daniel hung his coat without looking up. "Didn't think I'd be good company." "You never are," Noah teased, then softened. "Look, man, I know it's been years, but you've got to start living again. Lila needs more than just a shadow in a uniform." Daniel didn't answer. He turned to the window where snowflakes clung to the glass like faint fingerprints. "You ever get tired of telling me to move on?" "Every damn day," Noah said, "but I keep doing it because I remember the guy who used to smile." By afternoon, Daniel found himself patrolling near the community center, where the local church was holding an art fair for orphans and low-income kids. He wasn't supposed to be there officially. It was outside his beat, but something about the sound of laughter drew him closer. He parked the cruiser and stepped out. Inside, colors splashed across canvases, and paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling. The smell of hot cocoa and acrylic paint filled the air. And that's when he saw her, Evelyn Moore. Evelyn was in her early 30s, tall and slender, with dark honey blonde hair tied in a loose braid, and eyes the color of sea glass, soft, unguarded, and somehow knowing. She wore a wool coat and fingerless gloves stained with paint, speaking animatedly to a group of children as they mixed colors. Her laughter was easy, sincere, the kind that made people lean closer without realizing it. When she noticed Daniel standing by the doorway, she smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that acknowledged his existence as if she had been expecting him. "Officer Hayes," she said, her voice warm but firm, "are you here to arrest my art students?" Her tone carried a teasing kindness that caught him off guard. Daniel shook his head slightly. "No, ma'am, just making sure everyone's following the noise ordinance." Evelyn chuckled. "Then you might have to arrest me first." There was something disarming about her calm. Most people looked at Daniel with sympathy or distance. Evelyn looked at him as if she saw through the armor. They spoke for only a few minutes, about the art fair, about the snowstorm coming that evening, about how quiet Silverbrook had become since Christmas. Yet when Daniel left, something in him felt shifted, like a window had been cracked open in a room he hadn't aired in years. That evening, back home, the wind picked up. Lila sat on the rug with Ranger, drawing silently as the dog rested his head on her lap. The fireplace glowed softly. Daniel knelt beside them, his knees creaking. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Lila hesitated before turning the paper. It was a sketch of 3 figures under falling snow, 2 people and a dog. One of the people was holding the other's hand. Daniel's throat tightened. "It's us?" he asked. Lila nodded slightly. "Do you think Mommy can see us?" she whispered. He looked at the fire, unable to answer right away. "I think she'd be proud of you," he said finally. Ranger gave a small sigh, his tail brushing gently against Lila's knee. Later that night, as Daniel stood at the window watching snow bury the porch, a faint glow from the church across the street caught his eye. Through the frosted glass, he saw Evelyn locking the door, her figure silhouetted against the lamplight. She looked up for a brief moment, as if sensing his gaze, and raised a gloved hand in a small wave before disappearing into the snow. Daniel stayed there for a long while, the cold seeping through the window pane, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. Behind him, Lila's soft breathing filled the house. Ranger stirred once, ears twitching toward the door, before settling back down. Outside, the snow kept falling, silent, endless, and strangely comforting. That night, in the little town of Silverbrook, a new thread quietly began to weave itself into the fabric of their broken lives. A thread made not of certainty, but of something far rarer, the faint, almost forgotten promise of healing. The following week unfolded under skies the color of pewter, the kind of weather that made Silverbrook seem like a painting left out in the cold too long. Snow lined the gutters and rooftops like frosting, and icicles clung to the eaves of every old wooden house. Officer Daniel Hayes drove through the slumbering streets with Ranger in the passenger seat, the heater humming faintly. The German shepherd's head was tilted toward the window, his breath fogging the glass as his sharp amber eyes scanned the quiet sidewalks. Ranger had always been Daniel's silent companion, the kind who sensed things before words were ever needed. He was 5 now, his black and tan coat thick and gleaming, his demeanor calm yet vigilant. Since Margaret's passing, Ranger had become not just a dog, but a fragment of Daniel's sanity, one of the few living beings he still trusted fully. That morning, Daniel was assigned to patrol near the church again. The snowstorm that had been predicted last week had finally hit, and half the town was buried. The main roads were salted, but the smaller streets leading to the school and the community center were slick and treacherous. As Daniel stepped out of the cruiser, he saw a group of volunteers shoveling snow from the church entrance, and among them, there she was, Evelyn Moore. Evelyn's cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, her long braid tucked under a knit cap. She wore a heavy gray coat with paint stains still visible near the cuffs, a reminder of her art lessons. When she spotted Daniel, she smiled with an expression that warmed the icy air between them. "Officer Hayes," she called out, voice light but teasing. "Back to arrest us again for making too much joy?" Daniel managed a small smirk. "Depends. You still breaking city noise codes?" "Only with laughter," she replied, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Her humor carried no edge. It was the kind that came from someone who had learned to use kindness as armor. They began talking as they cleared snow together. Daniel learned that Evelyn had moved to Silverbrook 3 years ago after leaving Chicago, where she had taught art therapy to children in hospitals. She mentioned she'd once been engaged but lost her fiancé to a car crash during a snowstorm, the same winter Daniel lost Margaret. Perhaps that was why her eyes sometimes held a quiet sorrow beneath the warmth. "Art helped me heal," she said softly, pressing her shovel into the snow. "It's strange how you can't fix the past, but you can still paint something beautiful over it." Daniel didn't know how to reply. He just nodded and kept working beside her, his breath visible in the frigid air. Later that afternoon, he found himself driving to the elementary school to pick up Lila. Normally, Mrs. Barlow handled it, but the old woman had come down with a mild flu. When Lila saw her father waiting by the gate, she blinked in surprise, unsure whether to smile or retreat. Her coat was too big for her small hands clutching her backpack straps. "Hey, Bug," Daniel said gently. "Thought I'd surprise you." Lila nodded shyly, walking beside him. Ranger wagged his tail from the back seat when they approached. "Ranger missed you," Daniel said. "He told me." Lila's lips curved slightly, the faintest ghost of a smile. "Dogs can't talk," she whispered. "This one does," Daniel said with mock seriousness. "He says you draw better than me." On the drive home, the town looked like a snow globe someone had shaken too hard. As they passed the church, Daniel noticed Evelyn outside, hanging handmade paper lanterns by the steps for the town's winter fair. Each lantern had a child's drawing on it: stars, angels, mountains. "Can we stop?" Lila asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the glowing lights. Daniel hesitated, then pulled over. Evelyn turned when she heard the car door close. "Well, hello there," she said warmly, crouching to meet Lila's gaze. "You must be Lila. Your dad says you're quite the artist." Lila looked startled, glancing at Daniel, then back at the woman. "I just draw things," she murmured. "That's what artists do," Evelyn said with a wink. "Would you like to make a lantern too?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. Daniel stood a few steps back, watching as Evelyn spread out art supplies on the wooden bench. The girl's small fingers dipped a brush into pale blue paint, tracing soft lines across the paper. Evelyn's tone was gentle, patient, the same tone Margaret used to use during bedtime stories. When they were done, Lila had painted a dog sitting under a tree, its eyes glowing like stars. Evelyn smiled. "That's beautiful. What's his name?" Lila looked at Ranger, who sat nearby, tail brushing the snow. "Ranger," she whispered. Evelyn tied the lantern string and hung it beside the others. The paper glowed softly against the darkening sky, the painted dog illuminated from within. Daniel stood quietly, hands deep in his pockets, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. That evening, back home, the house didn't feel as hollow. Lila seemed lighter somehow, humming softly as she ate dinner. Daniel watched her, wondering if he should thank Evelyn, or perhaps thank God. After Lila went to bed, he sat by the window, looking at the faint lights from the church. Ranger lay beside his chair, head resting on his paws. "She's good for her," Daniel muttered. The dog tilted his head, as if agreeing. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the station earlier than usual. Officer Noah Bennett noticed the change immediately. "You look less dead," Noah said, raising an eyebrow. "Meet someone?" Daniel shot him a dry look. "You need hobbies, Noah." "I do have one," Noah replied. "It's called guessing why you suddenly smell like pine and happiness." Daniel smirked despite himself. "There's a teacher at the church. She's helping Lila paint." Noah leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Oh, so that's what they're calling it now, painting." Daniel rolled his eyes, but the teasing felt good, almost normal. Later that day, as Daniel filled out reports, the phone on his desk rang. The call came from Father O'Leary, the pastor of the church, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and the patience of a saint. "Officer Hayes," his voice came through the static, "I just wanted to thank you for stopping by yesterday. Lila's lantern was the most talked about at the fair. Evelyn's been telling everyone how talented she is." Daniel smiled faintly. "She needed that," he said. "We both did." When he hung up, his gaze drifted to the framed photograph of Margaret on his desk. For years, he couldn't look at it without feeling like he was betraying her memory. But today, the sight of her smile no longer hurt. It reminded him of how deeply she'd loved. Perhaps that kind of love didn't die. It just waited for the heart to be brave enough to open again. That weekend, Silverbrook held its Winter Charity Gala, an annual event where locals donated to the Children's Hospital. Daniel had no intention of attending until Evelyn appeared at the station that afternoon, wrapped in a navy blue coat, holding 2 tickets. "It's for a good cause," she said, her tone half playful, half insistent. "And I hear the coffee there isn't terrible." Daniel hesitated but finally nodded. That night, he arrived at the town hall in his dress uniform. Evelyn was already there, her hair loose for the first time he'd seen, cascading over her shoulders like golden threads. She smiled when she saw him, genuine and unguarded. Throughout the evening, they talked, not about loss, but about life, about Ranger's stubborn habit of stealing Lila's socks, about Evelyn's dream of opening a small art studio for local kids. Daniel found himself laughing quietly, his voice unfamiliar in its warmth. When the night ended, he offered to walk her home through the snow. The streets were quiet, the lamps glowing softly. Evelyn stopped halfway down the path, looking up at the sky. "You know," she said, "when it snows like this, I always think the world's trying to cover its scars." Daniel followed her gaze, his breath clouding in the cold. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe it's giving us a clean slate." At her porch, she turned to him. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, "for trusting me with Lila." Her eyes held something honest, yet distant, as if she carried secrets she wasn't ready to share. Daniel nodded. "Thank you for reminding her that light still exists." Ranger, standing beside him, gave a soft bark, breaking the stillness. Evelyn laughed quietly, reaching out to scratch behind his ear. "He's protective," she said. "That's a good thing." Daniel smiled faintly. "He always knows who to trust." As he walked away, snowflakes drifted around them, swirling under the streetlights. Behind him, Evelyn's silhouette lingered at the doorway until the darkness swallowed her. Daniel glanced once more over his shoulder, unaware that somewhere deep in Ranger's instinctive heart, a low unease was already stirring, something beyond the reach of words. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel slept without nightmares, and in the quiet house, Lila's small laughter echoed faintly from her dreams, as if the first hint of spring had whispered beneath the snow. Spring came late to Silverbrook that year. The snow melted reluctantly, revealing muddy streets and pale patches of grass, trying to remember how to be green again. The air still carried the chill of winter, but with it came faint promises, birdsong, sunlight breaking through the gray, and the slow rhythm of normal life returning. For Daniel Hayes, those weeks felt like the first breaths after being underwater too long. Evelyn Moore had become a part of their lives as naturally as morning coffee and evening prayers. She often visited after her art classes, bringing pastries from the town bakery and stories that made even Ranger tilt his head as if listening. Lila had changed too. The quiet, withdrawn girl who once spoke in whispers now laughed, softly but genuinely, when she and Evelyn painted together on the porch. Ranger would lie nearby, his ears flicking at every laugh, as though guarding the fragile joy that had returned to the house. One afternoon, as Daniel watched them from the window, he couldn't help but think that perhaps the world was offering him a second chance. Evelyn's kindness had a rhythm that matched his silences. She didn't demand words, she just filled the spaces between them. It wasn't long before people in town began to notice. Officer Noah Bennett, always blunt to a fault, teased him relentlessly. "I give it 2 months before you're buying flowers every Friday," he joked during a lunch break at the diner. The waitress, Sharon Miller, a round-faced woman in her 40s with dyed red hair and a heart-shaped necklace, chimed in. "He already does. Evelyn gets her tulips from me." Daniel pretended to scowl, but his eyes betrayed amusement. The waitress winked. "Good for you, honey. That house of yours needed a woman's touch." By early summer, Evelyn's visits turned into overnight stays. She claimed the house felt like home, and Daniel, too afraid of seeming ungrateful, didn't object. Her belongings began to appear quietly. A wool scarf draped over a chair, a hairbrush on the bathroom counter, a framed photo of a beach at dusk, placed on the mantel beside Margaret's family portrait. Daniel noticed the way Evelyn's things blended seamlessly into his life, yet somehow, little by little, his own memories began to disappear beneath them. When Evelyn officially moved in, she reorganized the house entirely. The dining room was rearranged, curtains replaced with silk ones that shimmered like frost in sunlight, and even the color of the kitchen changed from soft cream to cold gray. She said it made the house brighter. Daniel didn't argue. He told himself it was what people did when they started over. Lila, however, didn't share his ease. The first night Evelyn moved in, the girl couldn't sleep. Ranger lay beside her bed, his breath steady and protective. Lila whispered into his fur, "It doesn't smell like home anymore." The dog lifted his head slightly, his eyes, reflecting the dim light from the hallway, as if he understood. Evelyn tried, or at least appeared to. She cooked elaborate dinners, complimented Daniel's work, and offered Lila small gifts, books, ribbons, art supplies. Yet, beneath her sweetness there was a kind of precision that made people around her uneasy. She was organized to the point of obsession. Every cup had to face the same direction, every drawer closed silently, every plate spotless. Once, when Lila spilled a bit of milk on the table, Evelyn's smile stiffened. "We'll have to work on your coordination, dear," she said, her tone sugar-coated but eyes cold. Daniel brushed it off as discipline. "She's just trying to teach her," he told Noah one afternoon while checking patrol logs. But Noah's expression remained serious. "Dan, you ever wonder why someone that perfect shows up right when you're at your weakest?" Daniel frowned. "You think she's pretending?" "I think people hide things," Noah replied, "and some of them are really good at it." That same week, Evelyn began volunteering at the police charity fund. She said she wanted to give back and insisted on helping Daniel with the paperwork. She was efficient, almost unnervingly so, sorting receipts and donations with mechanical focus. The other officers liked her. She was charming, polite, always smiling. Even Chief Reynolds, a man who rarely trusted civilians, praised her diligence. Daniel felt proud, but somewhere deep down, something restless stirred. A quiet doubt he quickly buried under gratitude. One evening, Evelyn decided to host a dinner for the department. She cooked roast beef with rosemary, baked pies, and decorated the table with candles and tulips. Lila helped quietly, arranging napkins while Ranger circled the table, tail low, uneasy. When the guests arrived, laughter filled the house for the first time in years. Noah clapped Daniel on the back. "Told you, man, this is what you needed." Evelyn beamed, graceful and poised. Yet, whenever Daniel wasn't looking, her hand would rest firmly on Lila's shoulder, guiding her every move like a puppet on strings. Later that night, after everyone left, Evelyn began clearing the dishes. Daniel offered to help, but she waved him off with a soft laugh. "You work all day. Let me take care of things." He hesitated, then kissed her cheek, an unfamiliar gesture that made her smile widen. "You're a good man, Daniel," she said, her voice smooth as silk. Upstairs, Lila sat by her window, staring at the stars. Ranger lay beside her, his fur brushing her hand. She whispered, "Do you think she really likes us?" The dog's ear twitched, and he let out a low whine. "Yeah," Lila murmured, "I don't think so either." The next morning, Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and saw Evelyn reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. She looked radiant in the morning light, her hair tied loosely, her posture perfect. "Morning, love," she said, sliding a cup toward him. "I've been thinking maybe it's time to redecorate Lila's room. Brighter colors, less gloom." Daniel paused. "She likes her things the way they are." Evelyn tilted her head, smiling. "Children adapt quickly. Besides, a new start could help her heal." Her voice was kind, but her eyes left no room for debate. When Daniel left for work, Lila came down to find boxes stacked in her room. Her mother's quilt was folded and placed aside, the framed photo on her nightstand replaced with a floral painting Evelyn had brought from her old apartment. "Don't cry, darling," Evelyn said softly from the doorway. "We're making space for new memories." Lila nodded weakly, clutching her doll tighter. That night, when Daniel asked if she liked her new room, she only said, "It's pretty," and turned away. He mistook her silence for shyness, not heartbreak. Over the following weeks, Evelyn's influence grew stronger. She began managing Daniel's schedule, cooking all his meals, even organizing his work desk. "Efficiency," she'd say with a bright smile. "You'll thank me one day." He laughed it off, unaware of how much control he was slowly giving away. But Ranger noticed. The dog's behavior changed. He growled softly whenever Evelyn entered the room, alone with Lila. Once, he even stood between them, tail stiff, teeth slightly bared. Evelyn froze, her smile faltering for the first time. "Your dog needs training," she hissed quietly when Daniel wasn't around. One evening, Daniel returned home early and found the living room rearranged again. His late wife's piano, once the centerpiece, was gone. "Where's the piano?" he asked, confused. Evelyn looked up from the sofa, flipping through a magazine. "Oh, I sold it. No one played it, and it took up space." Daniel stared at her, speechless. "That piano was Margaret's," he said finally. Evelyn met his gaze calmly. "She's gone, Daniel. Don't you think it's time to stop living with ghosts?" Her words hit like a blade wrapped in velvet. That night, as snow began to fall again outside, Daniel sat in the darkened living room. The house was beautiful, immaculate, polished, and utterly lifeless. Upstairs, Lila cried quietly into Ranger's fur, the dog's warm body shielding her from the cold that no blanket could mend. For the first time since Evelyn moved in, Daniel felt an unease he couldn't name. The laughter had returned to the house, but it didn't sound like joy. It sounded like something rehearsed, hollow, as if the home itself had forgotten what it truly meant to be alive. By late autumn, Silverbrook was wrapped once more in frost. The air had grown sharp, mornings steeped in fog that rolled over the pines like smoke from an unseen fire. The Hayes house looked beautiful from the outside, windows glowing warmly, wreath on the door, tulips in neat rows under the porch light. But inside, beauty had begun to rot. The laughter that once filled the rooms now came too quickly, too perfectly, as if rehearsed. Evelyn Moore had turned domestic grace into performance art, and Daniel Hayes, too weary to question, clapped along. He had learned to live within her rhythm, her lists, her rules, her orchestrated smiles. When she looked at him with those soft sea-glass eyes, he saw what he wanted to see: stability, control, peace. But what he failed to notice were the small tremors behind her smile. The tightening jaw when he mentioned Margaret's name, the quiet resentment when Lila entered the room, the faint wince every time Ranger brushed against her leg. Lila, now 9, had grown quieter again. Her drawings, once full of color, had become faint outlines of houses and faceless figures. Ranger rarely left her side. His once playful energy had hardened into watchfulness. His ears were always tilted toward doors, his eyes tracking Evelyn's movements like a sentry. Daniel mistook it for stubbornness, unaware that the dog had become the only creature who still sensed danger. One evening, Daniel had to attend a late-night patrol meeting. Snow was falling again, thick and silent. Evelyn stood by the door as he fastened his uniform, her hair tied in a neat bun, her smile almost too calm. "Drive safe," she said sweetly, adjusting his collar. "You know how reckless drivers get when it snows." He nodded, pressed a brief kiss on her forehead, and left, unaware that behind him, Lila had frozen halfway down the stairs, clutching Ranger's collar tightly. When the sound of the car faded, Evelyn turned, her smile flattening like light under a closing door. "Well," she said softly, "it's just us now." She called Lila into the kitchen. The girl came slowly, her small frame swallowed in an oversized sweater. "You forgot to clean the porch steps," Evelyn said. "Snow piles up and people slip. Do you want your father to come home and break his neck?" Lila shook her head quickly. No, ma'am." "Then go shovel it." "It's dark outside," Lila whispered, "and cold." Evelyn's tone sharpened. "Then you should have done it earlier." Lila obeyed. She put on her mittens and trudged into the yard. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, her breath puffing in white clouds. Ranger followed, ignoring Evelyn's shouted, "Stay!" The dog pressed close as the child worked, his fur dusted in snow, his body a silent wall between her and the house. When she finished, her fingers numb, Evelyn appeared at the door holding a small trowel. "You missed a spot," she said. "We'll make it perfect." She stepped out, her boots crunching on the ice. "Let's plant new tulips for spring, right here." She pointed to the same patch where Margaret had once grown flowers. Lila hesitated. "But it's winter." "Then dig anyway," Evelyn snapped, thrusting the trowel into her hand. "We'll prepare the ground." The soil was frozen, the earth resisting each thrust of the tool. Lila's hands ached, her breath came in soft sobs that vanished into the cold. Evelyn stood above her, arms crossed, her breath forming a faint mist. "Deeper," she said. "That's where roots belong." Lila bit her lip, the cold biting her skin raw. "It's enough," she pleaded. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice a whisper of poison. "Your mother's roots are there, you know. Maybe if you dig far enough, you'll find her." The trowel slipped from Lila's fingers. Her eyes widened, glistening with terror. "You're lying," she whispered. Evelyn smiled, slow and cruel. "Am I?" She knelt, brushing Lila's hair back from her tear-streaked face. "Do you know why your mother's gone? Because of you. You were sick that day, remember? She went out to get your medicine in that storm. If she hadn't—" "Stop!" Lila cried, clutching her ears. "Please stop!" Evelyn's voice rose, sharp as shattered glass. "You don't deserve her. You don't even deserve to be here." Ranger growled then, low, warning, primal. Evelyn froze. The dog stepped between them, teeth bared, snow dusting his back like ash. His amber eyes locked on hers with something ancient and dangerous. For the first time, Evelyn faltered. "Get that animal away from me," she hissed. "Now!" Lila knelt behind him, sobbing. "He's not hurting anyone." "Do it!" Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip, and then headlights swept across the driveway. The crunch of tires broke the frozen silence. Daniel's patrol car stopped, the engine idling. He had returned early because a colleague had covered his shift. He stepped out, confusion crossing his face. "What's going on?" Evelyn straightened instantly, her tone switching to syrup. "Oh, darling, we were just planting tulips." Daniel looked from her to Lila, kneeling in the snow, dirt and tears streaking her cheeks, Ranger standing over her. Something in his chest twisted. "Lila?" he asked softly. The girl looked up, her lips trembling. I was just helping." Evelyn gave a rehearsed laugh. Children get so emotional when they're tired. Daniel's gaze lingered on the half-dug soil, the trowel, the little girl's shaking hands. He wanted to believe Evelyn's calm, but the unease that had been stirring inside him for months now rose to the surface. He led Lila inside without another word. Evelyn followed, her expression tightening when she thought he wasn't looking. Later that night, after putting Lila to bed, Daniel sat in the living room with Ranger by his feet. The dog's fur still carried traces of dirt, his ears twitching every few seconds. Daniel ran a hand down his back absent-mindedly. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you, boy?" he murmured. Ranger lifted his head, eyes glinting in the dim light. For a fleeting moment, Daniel swore the dog understood. He poured himself a glass of water and caught a glimpse of Evelyn through the kitchen doorway. She stood there in her silk robe, staring out at the yard where the soil still lay torn open. Her expression wasn't grief. It was satisfaction, faint and chilling. When she turned and noticed him, her smile returned effortlessly. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "No," Daniel said quietly. "Too much on my mind." She stepped closer, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "You think too much, Daniel. You should let go of the past." He forced a nod, though his mind was already elsewhere, on the dirt, the tears, and the fear he'd seen in his daughter's eyes. When he finally went upstairs, he found Lila awake, sitting in bed with Ranger curled beside her. "Dad," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart." "If someone says bad things about Mom, does it make them true?" His throat tightened. "No," he said firmly, sitting beside her. "Not everything people say deserves to be believed." Lila nodded slowly, her fingers tangled in Ranger's fur. "Ranger didn't let her hurt me." The dog shifted, pressing his head into her lap. Daniel brushed her hair back, guilt gnawing at him. "Get some rest," he murmured, but when he turned out the light, the darkness seemed to hum with unease. Downstairs, through the window, the garden glowed faintly under the moonlight, the patch of earth where innocence had been buried beneath frost. That night, for the first time, Daniel dreamed not of his wife, but of the soil, black, frozen, and whispering secrets he was no longer sure he wanted to hear. The morning after the storm, Silverbrook shimmered beneath a pale sun. Ice glazed the rooftops, and the trees along Maple Avenue bent beneath their frozen crowns. From the outside, the Hayes home appeared tranquil, its chimney breathing slow curls of smoke into the cold sky. Inside, however, silence had grown heavy, thick as the frost on the windows. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his untouched coffee cooling beside him. Across from him, Evelyn hummed softly while arranging a vase of tulips. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost mechanical. She wore a cream-colored sweater that complemented her golden hair, but her beauty now seemed distant, too deliberate, too polished. Lila ate quietly, stirring her oatmeal without taking a bite. Her face was pale, framed by her messy auburn hair, and there were faint shadows under her eyes. Ranger lay stretched across the doorway, his head resting on his paws, gaze fixed unwaveringly on Evelyn. When she glanced at him, he let out a low rumble, not a growl, but a warning. Evelyn's smile tightened. "You should consider getting him checked, Daniel," she said lightly. "He's been on edge lately." Daniel didn't look up. "He's protective," he replied. Evelyn's eyes flickered. "Of what, exactly?" After breakfast, Daniel dropped Lila off at school. The town was waking up slowly, the grocer sweeping his porch, the church bells ringing faintly through the fog. At the station, Officer Noah Bennett greeted him with a half smile. "You look like hell," Noah said, sliding him a cup of burnt coffee. Daniel shrugged. "Didn't sleep much." "Everything all right at home?" "Yeah," Daniel lied. Noah studied him for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "I saw Evelyn yesterday. She came by to drop off donation papers. Seemed different." Daniel frowned. "Different how?" "Too polite," Noah said, like someone reading from a script. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Harris, a tall, grizzled man in his 50s with a booming voice and a habit of rubbing the bridge of his nose when annoyed. "Hayes," he said, tossing a folder onto the desk. "Need you to review a few surveillance requests, some vandalism near the old bridge." Daniel nodded, flipping through the paperwork. But his mind wasn't on the job. It was still trapped in the image of Lila's face the night before, dirt-streaked and terrified. That evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. The house was spotless, the faint scent of lavender polish lingering in the air. Evelyn greeted him at the door with a glass of wine. "Rough day?" she asked sweetly. He nodded, scanning the room. "Where's Lila?" "In her room," she replied, her tone clipped. She was clumsy again, spilled juice on the carpet, her lips curled in mock sympathy. "I made her clean it. She needs structure." Daniel's jaw tensed. "She's a child." Evelyn's expression softened instantly. "Of course, darling. I only meant to help you." Later that night, after Evelyn had gone upstairs, Daniel lingered in the living room. Ranger lay by the sofa, tail flicking nervously. The dog's ears pricked at every creak of the house. Daniel followed his gaze toward the staircase, where faint light leaked from under Evelyn's closed study door. He frowned. She had said she was going to bed. Quietly, he ascended the stairs. The floorboards groaned softly under his weight. At the end of the hallway, Evelyn's door stood ajar. Inside, her voice murmured, low, measured. Daniel stepped closer. "Yes, Marcus, I understand." He suspects nothing. The words froze him in place. Her tone was calm, almost affectionate. "I've handled it. The files will be transferred by the end of the month." Daniel's hand tightened around the doorframe. Marcus Hale. He hadn't heard that name in years. A disgraced financial consultant he'd once investigated for embezzlement. A man with grudges carved into his smile. He stepped back before she could sense him and returned to his room, heart pounding. Ranger followed, tail low. "Did you hear that too, boy?" Daniel whispered. The dog's ears twitched. He sat on the bed's edge for a long time, staring at the shadows crawling along the ceiling. The unease that had been gnawing at him for weeks now took root, sharp and undeniable. The next day, while Evelyn was at the community center, Daniel began searching the house. He felt like a trespasser in his own home. In her study, every drawer was organized with obsessive precision. Receipts, donation forms, envelopes neatly labeled. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old letters, he found a small black USB drive. His breath caught. Plugging it into his laptop, he saw folders titled Silverbrook Fund and Project Hale. Inside were financial transfers, all bearing his signature, except he had never signed them. Someone had forged his name. When he closed the files, a faint sound made him turn. Lila stood in the doorway, clutching Ranger's collar. "Dad," she whispered, "what are you doing?" Daniel smiled faintly, though his chest felt tight. "Just work stuff, sweetheart. Don't tell Evelyn, okay?" Lila nodded quickly. "She doesn't like secrets," she murmured before turning away. That evening, Daniel acted normal. He ate dinner, made small talk, even complimented Evelyn's cooking. But beneath the table, Ranger's body remained tense, eyes darting between the two adults. Lila picked at her food, sensing the quiet war building around her. Evelyn poured herself another glass of wine, her laughter too bright, too sharp. "You should take a break from work, Daniel," she said. "Maybe we could go away for a weekend, just the two of us." He forced a smile. "Maybe." When the house finally went still, Daniel sat in his office, the USB clutched in his hand. He needed proof, real proof. So he opened the cabinet where his old police gear was stored and retrieved a small set of surveillance cameras. They were compact, discreet, perfect for corners and vents. He worked in silence, installing them in the kitchen, the hallway, and Evelyn's study. Ranger watched from the doorway, tail twitching, as if approving the decision. Days passed. Daniel acted as if nothing had changed. He went to work, came home, played with Lila, endured Evelyn's kisses. But every night he reviewed the footage. At first it was ordinary, Evelyn cooking, cleaning, reading. Then, one night, she appeared in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Marcus," she whispered. "He trusts me completely. The transfer will happen next week. After that, he's irrelevant." She paused, smiling faintly. "Don't worry about the child. She'll adapt." Daniel felt cold all over. His wife's gentle tone, the one that used to melt his exhaustion, was now a blade pressed behind his ribs. He saved the recording, labeling it Night 3. The next morning, he found Evelyn in the garden, pruning dead tulip stalks. She looked radiant in the winter light, her hair glowing like gold. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Like a rock," he lied. She smiled. "Good. You've been so distant lately. I worry." He forced a nod, though his pulse thundered. As he turned to go, Ranger barked suddenly, loud and sharp. Evelyn flinched. "Keep that beast under control," she snapped before catching herself. "Sorry, he startled me." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "He's just doing his job." Evelyn's smile returned, brittle. "And what job is that?" That night, Daniel transferred the footage to a secure drive and hid it in his office drawer. He knew this was only the beginning, but the truth was already spreading like cracks in glass. Upstairs, Lila dreamed fitfully, clutching her doll. In her sleep, she whispered her mother's name. Ranger lay beside her bed, one eye open, watching the door. And outside, the tulip bed lay buried under snow, a graveyard of lies waiting to thaw. Winter pressed harder over Silverbrook, as December arrived. The days shortened until the sun seemed to vanish behind a gray veil, and nights lingered long enough to swallow all warmth. Officer Daniel Hayes felt those nights stretch inside him too, each one colder, longer, heavier, with the truth he was beginning to uncover. He had watched enough of the camera footage to know that Evelyn's kindness was a mask, her love a performance rehearsed with chilling precision. And yet, he moved through the house like an actor trapped in the same scene, pretending not to know the lines already written for him. Evelyn continued to play her part flawlessly. She kissed his cheek before he left for work, baked pies for the neighbors, and smiled at church on Sundays. To the town, she was the portrait of grace. But behind those gentle gestures, she had grown distant, her affection mechanical, her laughter hollow. Daniel often caught her standing too long by the window, staring into the snow, as if calculating something unseen. That week, he met privately with Detective Claire Monroe, an old colleague from his early days in the department. Claire was 36, sharp and composed, with short chestnut hair and steady hazel eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to survive in a world that rarely listened to women in uniform. She had once been Daniel's partner before transferring to the financial crimes unit in Helena. "You look worse than when I left you," she said when he arrived at the diner. Daniel managed a tired smile. "You always had a way with compliments." They sat in a corner booth, the neon light flickering over the snow-dusted window. Daniel slid a small USB across the table. "I need you to verify these transfers. Evelyn's name might not appear, but her fingerprints are all over it." Claire plugged it into her laptop, scrolling silently. "These accounts link to a shell company," she said after a moment. "Hale Holdings, Marcus Hale. Didn't you have a case on him?" Daniel nodded grimly. "He's the one she's been talking to." Claire's jaw tightened. "Daniel, you're sitting on fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Why haven't you come forward?" He stared at his hands. "Because she's in my house, Claire, and my daughter's in there with her." That night, Daniel returned home to find Evelyn in the kitchen, humming softly as she arranged a bouquet of white roses. Her beauty struck him with cruel irony. How easily she could look like innocence itself. "You're home early," she said, turning with a bright smile. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," he replied. "Rough day." She stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "You work too hard. Maybe you should take a few days off." Her touch was warm, but Daniel felt only the chill of her deceit. "Maybe," he said flatly. Later, while Evelyn was bathing upstairs, he entered her study again. Ranger followed him quietly, his nails clicking on the hardwood. Daniel opened her desk drawer and found new documents, bank statements, phone receipts, and an envelope addressed to M.H. with a London postmark. He snapped photos of each page on his phone, his pulse racing. When he turned, Ranger's ears perked up. The dog gave a low warning sound. A floorboard creaked outside the door. Daniel froze, then slipped the papers back and pretended to adjust the curtains just as Evelyn entered. She wore a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, eyes sharp. "You're in my study again," she said softly. "Looking for something?" Daniel forced a smile. "A pen. Couldn't find one in the kitchen." She held his gaze for a long, unsettling moment before smiling back. "You should ask next time." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the glow of the computer reflecting in his tired eyes, as he wrote a confidential report to Claire. His message was simple. "If anything happens to me or Lila, you'll know where to start." He saved it as a draft and didn't hit send. Yet. Ranger rested beside him, his breathing steady, a silent sentinel against the dark. Meanwhile, Evelyn's game escalated. Over the next few days, she began inserting herself into Daniel's work. She dropped by the station with lunch, greeted everyone with warmth, and subtly inquired about ongoing cases. Even Captain Harris commented on how fortunate Daniel was to have such a supportive wife. Daniel smiled through his teeth. "Yes, sir. Very fortunate." But, deep down, he was counting the days before the storm broke. On Friday, Evelyn suggested a dinner with friends. "Just a few people from the charity board," she said. "They'd love to meet you properly." Daniel agreed, though every instinct screamed caution. The dinner was held at the Willow Inn, a rustic restaurant overlooking the frozen river. The guests, three elegantly dressed couples, laughed over wine and candlelight. Evelyn was radiant, her laughter weaving through the air like music. Daniel played along, charming, courteous, silent when needed. But then he noticed one of the men, a tall figure with silvered hair and piercing blue eyes, watching Evelyn too closely. The man smiled faintly, raising his glass in acknowledgement. Daniel's blood ran cold. Marcus Hale, the man who should have been a continent away. Evelyn leaned toward him, her voice soft but trembling. "Don't make a scene," she whispered. "It's just business." Daniel's hand tightened around his glass. "Business? You wouldn't understand," she hissed quietly. "This is bigger than you think." He excused himself, pretending to take a call, and stepped outside into the biting air. Snowflakes swirled under the lanterns. His phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Daniel, listen. I traced Hale Holdings. There's a pending transfer scheduled under your name. $700,000. If that goes through, you'll be implicated." Daniel exhaled sharply. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." When he returned inside, Evelyn was alone. Marcus was gone. She looked up, her smile brittle. "Everything all right?" "Perfect," he said coldly. That night, as they drove home, silence filled the car like smoke. Evelyn watched the snow out the window. "You're angry," she said softly. "No," he replied. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About trust." She smiled faintly. A dangerous thing to lose. Back home, Daniel tucked Lila into bed. She stirred sleepily. "Dad," she whispered. Ranger growled at her again. "He doesn't like when she touches my things." Daniel brushed her hair gently. "Then listen to him," he said quietly. "He's smarter than both of us." Downstairs, Evelyn poured herself a drink. "You were distant tonight," she said. "If something's wrong, just tell me." Daniel stared at her, exhaustion and anger colliding in his chest. "Do you ever stop pretending?" he asked. Her eyes flickered, then narrowed. "Be careful what you accuse me of." "Oh, I'm past accusations," he said. "I've got proof." Her smile faltered, then returned, calm, mocking. "You think anyone will believe you over me? You're a grieving cop with a record of stress leave. I'm the respectable wife who saved you." He took a slow step forward, voice low. "Maybe. But I'm not the one who left fingerprints on a forged transfer." Her eyes widened slightly, just enough to betray the first crack in her armor. "You shouldn't have gone through my things," she said, her tone now soft, venomous. "You shouldn't have lied to me," he answered. Before either could speak again, Ranger barked sharply from upstairs. Both turned. A faint thud followed, a sound from Lila's room. Daniel sprinted up the stairs, heart hammering, and found Lila awake, clutching her doll, tears on her face. "I heard her," the girl sobbed. "Talking on the phone. She said you'll be gone soon." Daniel's breath caught. He looked back toward the hallway. Empty. Evelyn was still downstairs, smiling faintly as she sipped her wine. That night, Daniel sat beside Lila until she fell asleep, Ranger lying protectively at her feet. As he turned off the lamp, his decision hardened like ice. Tomorrow, he would end this, no matter the cost. The sun had not yet risen over Silverbrook, and the world outside Daniel Hayes' window was frozen white. Frost covered the panes, turning the view into a blurred painting of trees and snow. Inside, the house was too still. Every sound, every breath, every creak seemed amplified in that silence before dawn. Daniel sat at his desk, eyes heavy from a sleepless night, the faint blue glow of his laptop washing over his face. On the screen were the surveillance videos, lined up in neat digital order, each file a confession waiting to be heard. He hit play once more. Evelyn's voice filled the room, smooth, precise, poisonous. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late. Marcus already has the signatures, the house, the funds, everything. It's done. Then she laughed, soft and sharp, a sound that scraped against Daniel's bones. Ranger, lying beside him, raised his head, ears twitching. The German shepherd was restless, sensing the change in his master. Daniel reached down, rubbing the dog's neck absently. "It's over," he whispered. "We end this today." His reflection in the dark window looked older than his 38 years. His once clean-shaven face was shadowed with fatigue, his gray eyes hollow, yet determined. He had been a man of duty all his life, but duty felt different now. It wasn't about the badge or the law. It was about protecting what was left of his family. When morning came, Evelyn greeted him at the kitchen table, dressed impeccably in a dark blue dress, hair tied in a loose bun. "You're up early," she said lightly, sipping her coffee. "You too," he replied. She smiled faintly. "I couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." Her words mirrored his, but her tone was effortless, almost rehearsed. Daniel's stomach twisted. Lila entered the kitchen, clutching Ranger's collar. She looked small and pale in her winter sweater, her eyes cautious. "Good morning, sweetheart," Evelyn cooed. Lila didn't answer. Instead, she crouched beside Ranger, whispering something into his ear. Evelyn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Daniel, perhaps she should spend the weekend at your mother's," she suggested sweetly. "You know, so we can have some time alone." Daniel stirred his coffee slowly. "My mother's visiting my brother," he lied. "We'll manage." Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "Of course," she said softly. "We always do." Later that morning, Daniel drove to the station. The roads were slick with ice, and the sky hung low, the color of pewter. He parked behind the precinct, away from the main entrance, and called Detective Claire Monroe. She met him near the back door, wearing a thick brown coat and black gloves. Her expression was tense. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. "If she suspects anything—" "She already does," Daniel interrupted. "She's planning something, today." Claire's brow furrowed. "Then we move now. I've got enough to involve federal agents, but we need her caught in the act. Can you stall her?" Daniel nodded grimly. "Long enough for you to get here." When he returned home, the air inside the house felt heavy, charged. Evelyn was sitting on the couch reading. Her eyes flicked up when he entered. "You look pale, Daniel. Long day?" "You could say that." He set his badge and gun on the counter, his movements slow, deliberate. "I've been thinking, maybe we do need a fresh start." Her face softened, wary but intrigued. "Really?" "Yeah," he said. "Let's take a drive, just you and me." Evelyn's lips curved in a delicate smile. "That sounds lovely." But as she stood to fetch her coat, Ranger growled low in his throat, fur bristling. "Quiet," Daniel murmured, though the warning in the dog's body made his pulse quicken. Evelyn froze, then turned, her expression sharpening. "You're nervous," she said softly. "Why?" Daniel forced a casual shrug. "Just tired." They drove in silence. Snow drifted across the winding forest road outside of town. The air inside the car was thick with unspoken tension. Evelyn's gloved fingers rested lightly on her lap, but her eyes, cold and calculating, watched him from the side. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The cabin," Daniel replied. "I figured it's quiet there." Evelyn tilted her head, smiling faintly. "The cabin where Margaret died?" He stiffened, gripping the wheel tighter. "That was an accident." "Was it?" she murmured. "You've always been such a good liar, Daniel." He stopped the car abruptly. "Enough," he snapped. Evelyn's smile turned into something darker. "You should have known I'd find out. The files, the cameras. You think I didn't see?" His stomach sank. She leaned closer, her voice low and venomous. "I warned Marcus you'd be difficult. He thought we'd have to make it look like an accident again. A fall, a fire. It worked once." Daniel's blood ran cold. "You killed her," he whispered. Evelyn's expression didn't change. "She was in the way, just like you are now." She reached into her coat. Daniel reacted instantly, grabbing her wrist. The car swerved, tires screaming against the ice. Ranger barked furiously from the back seat. The gun Evelyn had hidden tumbled from her hand as the vehicle skidded off the road, slamming into a snowbank. For a moment, there was only silence, the hiss of the wind, the crunch of cooling metal. Daniel stumbled out of the car, dazed, snow stinging his face. He pulled open Evelyn's door. She was alive, blood trickling from her temple, eyes burning with rage. "You ruined everything," she hissed. Daniel's voice was steady now, steel beneath exhaustion. "No, you did." He handcuffed her wrists with the spare set from his belt, ignoring her protests. "You'll never prove anything," she spat. You think your word means anything against mine? I don't have to, Daniel said, holding up the small camera he had clipped to his jacket, its light still blinking red. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Within minutes, police cars appeared through the snow, red and blue lights flashing across the white landscape. Detective Claire Monroe stepped out first, her breath fogging in the cold. You did it, she said quietly. Daniel nodded, exhaustion finally overtaking him. It's over. Claire approached Evelyn, her tone sharp. Evelyn Moore, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Evelyn only smirked, blood staining her teeth. You think this ends with me? She whispered. Marcus will finish what I started. Claire's expression hardened. We'll find him. As they loaded Evelyn into the back of a cruiser, Daniel stood beside his car, the icy wind biting through his coat. Ranger pressed against his leg, shivering slightly, his breath visible in the cold air. Lila's face flashed in his mind, her smile, her fear, her small hands clutching Ranger's fur. He exhaled slowly, relief and grief intertwining like twin currents. Claire touched his arm gently. You need rest. We'll take her from here. Daniel nodded, his voice rough. Just make sure she never comes near my daughter again. I promise. By the time he returned home, night had fallen. Lila ran to him the moment he walked through the door, throwing her arms around his waist. You're okay, she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. Daniel knelt and held her close. We're safe now, he said softly. Ranger lay down beside them, curling his body protectively around the child. Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering the tire tracks that led away from their house. For the first time in months, Daniel felt the quiet of the world not as a threat, but as peace returning. Yet somewhere deep in that peace, beneath the whispering of the storm, he knew one truth remained. Some battles don't end when the sirens fade. They echo long after, in the hearts of those who survive. A week had passed since the night the sirens tore through Silverbrook, and the small mountain town was slowly returning to its rhythm. Snow still blanketed the hills, but the air felt lighter now, like the world itself was exhaling after a long-held breath. Daniel Hayes stood on his porch, watching dawn spill pale gold across the frozen landscape. The bruises on his face had faded, but the shadows in his eyes lingered. Beside him, Ranger stretched and shook the snow from his thick black and tan fur before lying down again, his amber eyes fixed on the street below. Lila was still asleep inside, curled up with her old stuffed bear, the one toy Evelyn had never managed to replace. The world outside was calm, but inside Daniel's mind, unease had taken root. Evelyn's arrest had made headlines. Local officer's wife charged in multi-state fraud scheme. Reporters had camped near the precinct, chasing the story. But Daniel kept silent. He wasn't a man built for fame. He wanted peace, for Lila, for himself. But he knew peace wasn't the same as safety. Evelyn's last words still haunted him. Marcus will finish what I started. That morning, as Daniel prepared breakfast, the phone rang. It was Detective Claire Monroe. She's talking, Claire said without greeting. Her voice sounded strained, as if she hadn't slept either. Evelyn? Yes, claims she only followed Marcus's plan, that he manipulated her. Do you believe her? No, Claire sighed. But she gave us a name. Someone called Dr. Yates, said he's been helping Marcus with offshore accounts. You ever heard of him? Daniel frowned. Yates? No, but I'll help however I can. After hanging up, Daniel poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The snow outside glowed faintly under the morning sun. Lila appeared at the doorway, her hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. Morning, Dad. Her voice was small but steadier than it had been a week ago. Morning, kiddo. She sat beside him, resting her head on his arm. Are we safe now? The question hit him like a whisper of guilt. We are, he said softly, brushing her hair back. I promise. But promises felt fragile these days, like glass too thin to hold. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by the precinct to meet Claire. She was waiting in her office, surrounded by folders, her desk buried under documents. Her coat hung on the chair behind her, revealing a plain gray sweater. Her face, always composed, now carried fatigue around the eyes. Glad you came, she said, gesturing for him to sit. We traced some of the money Marcus laundered. It passed through accounts owned by a research institute in Montana. Silverpine Biotech. You heard of it? No, Daniel replied. But that name sounds familiar. Claire nodded grimly. It should. Guess who's on the board of trustees? She slid a photo across the desk. Evelyn. The picture showed her shaking hands with a group of men in suits, her smile flawless. Daniel clenched his jaw. She was planning this long before she met me. Before Claire could respond, Captain Harris entered the room. He was dressed in his thick wool coat, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Hayes, he greeted, his deep voice rumbling like gravel. Heard you've been through hell. Daniel managed a weary smile. Still climbing out, sir. Harris nodded, his expression softening. Monroe briefed me. We're handing this to federal authorities, but I want you both to be cautious. If Hale's still out there, he'll come looking for anyone tied to Evelyn. As Daniel left the station, snow began falling again. Soft, silent flakes drifting like feathers. He drove home along the old forest road, the trees bending under the weight of white. Halfway there, Ranger suddenly sat upright in the back seat, ears alert, low growl rumbling in his chest. Daniel slowed, scanning the woods. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, a black SUV parked along the shoulder, engine running, windows tinted dark. No license plate? His pulse spiked. He drove on, forcing his hands to stay steady on the wheel, but Ranger kept growling until the SUV disappeared behind the trees. That night, he double-checked every lock in the house. Lila was asleep upstairs, and Ranger paced the hallway restlessly. Daniel's instinct screamed that someone had been watching him. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey, his first in months, and sat by the fire, trying to quiet his mind. The doorbell rang. He froze. It was past midnight. Ranger barked deep and fierce. When Daniel opened the door, he found a man standing on the porch, half hidden by the snow. He was tall, in his mid-40s, with a dark coat and gray streaks in his beard. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, but wary. "Officer Hayes?" the man asked. His voice was calm but cold, like the wind outside. "Who's asking?" Daniel replied. The man held up an ID, Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Agent Roy Patterson," he said. "Mind if I come in?" Inside, Patterson removed his gloves, revealing rough hands. Working hands, not the kind used to paperwork. "I'm leading the case against Marcus Hale," he began. "We intercepted some of his recent communications. He mentioned your name, and your daughter's." Daniel's stomach twisted. "What does he want?" Patterson's gaze darkened. "Retribution. Hale's desperate. We believe he's still in the country. Your wife," he corrected himself, "Evelyn, wasn't lying about Yates. There's a network funding Hale's operation, and Silverbrook's been used as a front." Daniel leaned forward. "So, this isn't over." Patterson shook his head. "Not even close. We're placing surveillance near your property, but I suggest you keep a low profile. No routines, no unnecessary travel. Marcus Hale is dangerous and intelligent. He doesn't go down quietly." After Patterson left, Daniel stood at the window, watching the snow swirl around the empty street. Ranger sat beside him, tail twitching. "Looks like we're not done, boy," Daniel murmured. The dog's gaze met his, steady and loyal. Upstairs, he could hear Lila's soft breathing through the vent. He whispered, "I'll keep her safe, no matter what." The following days passed in tense quiet. Daniel stayed home on leave, spending time with Lila, baking cookies, watching old movies, walking Ranger through the snow-covered park. Those moments of normalcy felt almost sacred, yet every time a car slowed outside, every creak in the floor, every flicker of headlights through the blinds sent a chill up his spine. On the third evening, Claire called again. "We got something," she said. "Federal teams raided a storage facility tied to Hale. They found fake passports, cash, and—" She hesitated. "Photos of your house. Recent ones." Daniel's heart sank. "How recent?" 2 days ago." He ended the call and looked toward the window. The night outside was black, silent except for the hum of the heater. Then, faintly, Ranger lifted his head and growled. Daniel reached for his gun instinctively, moving toward the window. In the distance, beyond the tree line, he saw the faint glint of headlights flicker once, then vanish. The storm had passed, but the shadows it left were far from gone. The blizzard arrived without warning that night, sweeping over Silverbrook with a fury that silenced the entire valley. Snow came in thick sheets, carried by howling winds that rattled the windows of every house in town. The world outside seemed to vanish into a white void, and with it, every sense of safety Daniel Hayes had fought to rebuild. He stood in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, listening to the static-filled voice of Agent Roy Patterson. "Stay inside," Patterson ordered. "We've intercepted chatter. Marcus Hale's in the area. 2 vehicles were spotted heading north on the forest road near your property." Daniel's grip tightened. "How close?" "Too close," Patterson said grimly. "We're sending units, but the storm's slowing everything down. Just hold out until we get there." Daniel glanced toward the staircase. Upstairs, Lila was asleep in her room, unaware of the danger lurking beyond the walls. Ranger stood at the window, fur bristling, his breath fogging against the glass. The dog's instincts were sharpened by the years of service he'd had before retirement. A 5-year-old German shepherd trained for search and rescue, once decorated for bravery, now fiercely devoted to guarding his new family. Tonight, his eyes glowed amber in the dim light, fixed on the woods. "We'll be fine, boy," Daniel whispered, though he didn't believe it. The storm grew worse. Power flickered, then died completely, plunging the house into darkness. The only sound was the wind's roar and the faint rhythmic creaking of the porch. Daniel moved quickly, locking every door and window, then retrieved his service pistol and flashlight from the drawer. He checked the chamber, loaded. He placed an extra magazine in his pocket. Suddenly, Ranger stiffened and let out a low growl. The hairs on his neck rose like quills. Daniel froze, listening. Over the wind, there came the faint crunch of footsteps on snow. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the porch. He aimed the flashlight toward the window, but all he saw was a blur of swirling white. The doorbell rang once, softly, then silence. Daniel raised his gun. "Who's there?" No answer, only the storm. Then a faint voice. "Officer Hayes, Patterson, open up." Relief washed over him for a split second before instinct pulled it back. Patterson had just said he was miles away. Daniel's voice hardened. "If you're Patterson, what's the name of your first partner at Quantico?" Silence. Then the sound of movement, the squeak of boots, the metallic click of a weapon being cocked. Daniel dove behind the counter just as the front door exploded inward. A figure in black storm gear stepped through the smoke of splintered wood, holding a suppressed rifle. Marcus Hale. His face was gaunt, angular, framed by streaks of snow-damp gray hair. His blue eyes burned with cold fury. He moved like a predator, silent, deliberate. "You made this very personal, Hayes," he said, his voice low but steady. "You should have stayed out of it." Daniel fired once. The bullet shattered the lamp beside Hale, glass spraying the air. Hale ducked, returning fire. Ranger lunged from the shadows, slamming into Hale's leg, teeth sinking deep. Hale shouted, kicking violently. The dog refused to let go. Daniel seized the moment, rushing forward to disarm him, the 2 men crashing into the floor. The pistol slid under the sofa. They grappled, fists striking, breath ragged. Hale was strong, but desperation made Daniel stronger. He slammed Hale's head against the hardwood, once, twice, until the man went limp. But before Daniel could catch his breath, a new voice cut through the storm, a woman's, sharp and cold. "Step away, officer." He turned slowly. Another figure stood in the doorway, her gun aimed squarely at his chest. She was tall and wiry, her dark hair pulled into a severe braid, her face pale and angular. She looked to be in her 40s, dressed in black tactical gear that matched Hale's. Her expression was unreadable, her hands steady. "Dr. Yates, I presume," Daniel said through clenched teeth. She smiled faintly. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for." Lila's scream came from upstairs, a sound that tore through Daniel's chest like a knife. "She's just a child," he growled. "Let her go." Yates shook her head. "She's leverage." Ranger growled, baring his teeth, but Yates didn't flinch. "You think Evelyn was the architect?" she continued. "She was just a piece. Marcus and I built this network long before she came along. Silver Pine was ours. You destroyed years of work." Daniel's pulse hammered. "You're finished?" he said. "The FBI's on their way." She laughed softly. "In this weather? You'll be dead before they make it up the mountain." Then, with surgical precision, she fired. Daniel dove behind the table, the bullet grazing his arm. Ranger barked, lunging toward Yates, but she turned her gun on the dog. "Don't!" Daniel shouted, firing back. His shot hit the doorframe inches from her shoulder. She flinched, stumbled backward, and Ranger pounced, knocking her to the ground. Her gun clattered across the floor. Daniel rushed forward, grabbing it before she could recover. Yates spat blood, glaring up at him. "You think killing me will save you?" she hissed. Daniel's voice was steady. "No, but it'll save her." He cuffed her hands with the same pair that had once bound Evelyn. "You're under arrest." At that moment, a crash sounded from the back of the house. Another intruder. Hale, bleeding but conscious again, stumbled toward the stairs, a knife in hand. He was heading for Lila. Daniel sprinted after him, shouting, "Lila, lock the door!" Upstairs, he found Hale forcing his way into her room, rage twisting his face. Lila clung to the corner, eyes wide with terror. Daniel raised the gun. "Marcus, don't!" Hale turned, knife raised, a final grin of madness spreading across his face. The gunshot echoed through the storm. When silence fell again, Hale lay motionless on the floor, the knife slipping from his hand. Daniel's hands trembled, the gun lowering slowly. Lila ran into his arms, sobbing. "It's over," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's over, baby girl." Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights cut through the storm. Patterson burst through the door, followed by Claire Monroe and a squad of agents. "Hayes!" Patterson shouted. "You all right?" Daniel nodded weakly. "We're fine." Claire stepped forward, eyes scanning the scene. She placed a gentle hand on Lila's shoulder. "You were brave," she said softly. "Your mom would be proud." They led Yates out in cuffs, her expression unreadable. "This isn't the end," she muttered. Patterson shook his head. "It is for you." Outside, the storm began to fade, and the first hint of dawn broke over the ridge. By morning, the world was quiet again. The power returned. Lila slept soundly on the couch, her small hand resting on Ranger's fur. Daniel sat nearby, staring at the fireplace. His arm was bandaged, his face pale, but his heart, after months of chaos, felt still. Claire approached, her voice gentle. "They're taking Hale's body and Yates into custody. You'll be cleared of the shooting." "I'm not worried about that," Daniel said quietly. "I just want her to have peace." Outside, the snow had stopped. The sun rose over Silverbrook, scattering light across the white fields. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the warmth of it touch his face. Not the sharp, distant glow of duty, but something deeper, something like grace. He looked at Lila, at Ranger, and whispered, "We made it." Ranger lifted his head, tail thumping softly. The tulip garden behind the house lay buried under snow, but Daniel knew that when spring came, the flowers would bloom again, stronger, brighter, reborn from the cold earth. And maybe, just maybe, so would they. In the quiet after every storm, there is always a moment when we realize it wasn't our strength that saved us, but the grace of God guiding us through the darkness. Just like Daniel and his daughter found peace after pain, each of us carries battles that only faith can calm. When the world feels cold, remember that God's light still shines even beneath the snow. It may not come when we expect it, but it always arrives when we need it most. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen. Leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from. And write Amen if you believe that God's love can heal every broken home and every weary soul. May the Lord bless you and your family today and always. And if you want more stories of faith, hope, and second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.